This is Season 4 of Southpaw Deep Space Nine. Season 5 will be released on the Southpaw Pod Patreon. This episode was recorded on September 1st, 2024.
All right, Jay.
We are back with Southpaw Deep Space Nine Season 4. If you don't know what SDS9 is, it's Southpaw's completionist DS9 watch-along show, where we watch every episode, recap it, and analyze it. We are your hosts, Scott and Sam. Today, we are discussing the Muse. Scott, can you recap this episode?
Sure thing. Jake is on the promenade doing what he loves best, people watching. He used to do it with his buddy, but now he's by himself. He's writing character sketches for his books. He's making cool ideas. He makes eye contact with an alien woman, and she walks away. Odo comes into his office, and who do we see? Lwaxana Troi, last seen in Fascination. Mother of the next generation empath and counselor Deanna Troi. She's pregnant. Lwaxana is upset because her husband, Jael Tavnian, wants to take control of her son once he's born. In the culture, there is a total gender separation, which obviously is reductive and harmful because fuck a binary, also leads to confusion and socialization issues. Lwaxana considers Odo a good friend and needs his support to find a place to have a baby and keep him with her mother. Odo is perplexed. The woman from earlier sits across from Jake and talks to him. She can tell he's a writer. She can spot creatives. Her name is Onaya, and she lightly name drops a famous Cardassian architect, Tavor Kell, and says that she met him and inspired him. She has a weakness for artists, and artists have a weakness for her. She encourages him to be who he is. She suggests to skip writing school and to just work on art, and believes that she can help him learn, and invites him to her quarters. Jake is in his own quarters working on his book iPad thingamabob. Ben is dressed for vacation to go do a safari with Cassidy Yates for a few days, and it was supposed to be all three of them, but Jake asked to skip so he can work on his writing and meet with Onaya. Lwaxana is drinking with Worf, Jadzia, Kira, talking about the futility of love. Everyone is bummed out. Quark goes to Odo and he's mad because the Lwaxana mood is contagious. And if everybody around her is unhappy and they're at the bar is not good. Business is bad. So Odo asks Lwaxana for a walk to get her out of the vibes. Lwaxana goes to Odo's quarters under a false pretense and warns him to be careful of his heart. Lwaxana asks to sit as she is getting baby kicks. She sits down. She is tired. She thinks maybe her baby can sense thoughts, as betazoids have that effect on each other of highly emotional people. Lwaxana falls asleep in Odo's arms and promises Odo he'll find her peace. He'll find his peace. Odo morphs his arm into a blanket. It's cute. Jake meets Onaya in her quarters. She has a bunch of candles lit and notices Jake is nervous. Jake has an idea for a autobiographically inspired style novel about loss in life, and Jake feels he's can't come to grips with the enormity of it and has not been able to start it. He just has the first line. Onaya gives Jake a pen of a famous writer and paper and suggests that he write what comes to his mind and see what happens. She basically does a mindfulness exercise. Onaya massages Jake's brain and stimulates his creative flow. It's a little sensual, and it appears there is something of an energy connection between them. You see energy coming. What is this? Equivalent exchange? The next morning, Luoxana and Odo are playing hide and seek, but their game is cut short because Odo finds out that Luoxana's husband, Jael, has arrived and notes that Odo broke Luoxana's heart. Odo meets Jael in his office and explains that Luoxana will not give up her child, and he explains that he has a legal right to his son, and he has the right to have him segregated and just be around men until he's an adult, because that's what they do in their culture. Odo has been looking through the laws and reveals a loophole. In Tavnian structure, the mother's husband, not the bio dad, has rights to a male child. So Odo, he has a plan. He will marry Luoxana in a Tavnian ceremony. This will end the marriage to Jael and allow Luoxana to keep the child. They'll just get married for a couple months, meet the legal requirements, and then they'll annul it.
A note to our listeners. If you love the Southpaw Project, please support us and help us get paid for our labor by financially supporting us on Patreon. This will give you access to exclusive bonus content, like early releases of Southpaw Deep Space Nine, our fictional narrative podcast, Fighters Brew, break-free versions of our shows without interruptions like you're hearing now, bonus articles, Fighters Brew transcripts with extra content, Liberation Martial Arts Online, as well as our private chat group on Discord. You can also make one-time donations at Ko-Fi or show your solidarity by wearing our swag. You can find all pertinent links at southpawpod.com.
Jael asks to be present for the marriage. You see, there needs to be an emotionality for the wedding to work. So he is dubious. Odo just needs to LARP and convince Jael that he genuinely wants to marry Luoxana for the plan to succeed. Jake is so immersed in writing and energy that he gets a nosebleed. He is overwhelmed with ideas and is hemorrhaging words, non-stop creation. Onaya suggests that he rest, but Jake insists on continuing to write. Odo arranges a wedding with Luoxana, and Miles, Bashir, Kira, Jadzia, Quark, and others are there. And Jael calls this a charade, or charade, however you want to say it. Odo gives a Tavnian traditional speech to declare marriage. However, the speech is superficial and largely cold, and Jael calls poppycock. Odo then tells about how Luoxana opened up his life. He was ashamed of his otherness and didn't feel connected to anyone, and Luoxana saw his differences, and instead of being repugnant, was curious. He was wanted for who he was, and therefore to meet her made him not feel alone. It's a beautiful, heartfelt speech. Jael buys it, and they are married. And then before Jael leaves, he says some gross misogynistic bile and gets out of here. Quark now wants to go to the bar as the good vibes make for good business, and Luoxana is largely appreciative. Back at Onaya's, Jake has been up for 3 days writing and won't break. Onaya takes Jake's pen and says he needs to rest. Jake goes to the promenade, tries to get some OJ, and he passes out. Bashir takes a look at him at the infirmary, and his cerebral cortex is on the verge of synaptic collapse. Something's going on, and he needs to be in a neutral stabilization vibe for a little bit. At night, in the infirmary, an energy beam comes into the infirmary. It's Onaya. She's energy? What? And she knocks out the doctor and takes Jake to finish what he started. It appears Jake's brain has been affected by psionic energy. At Onaya's, she is basically sucking Jake's energy as Jake is writing. He's going to make something great, but at what cost? Ben stops Onaya. She kills artists by taking their energy. Onaya is an energy vampire and trades art for energy. She turns into energy and leaves into space. In Odo's quarters, Luoxana informs Odo she's going to Beta Z. Odo asks Luoxana to stay. Odo's lonely. Loxana, though, is still kind of in love with Odo, and it's a little painful for her to be around him. And she values their friendship, and they do share a kiss. But at the end of the day, Odo needs his own person. Jake comes to, and Ben tells him that he's read what he wrote. He says it's promising, and he likes the father character, but the spelling is terrible. Jake feels that he didn't write it, that Onaya took advantage. Ben says it was in him always, and it's his book. So Jake will continue work on Anslem another time.
So this episode was another Jake Sisko with an older woman episode.
Yep.
The Muse could have also been called the groomer, where Onaya is trying to groom a young Jake Sisko into a literary giant, then suck his brains out.
Yeah, and she's hundreds of years old. She's a being of light. Look, this episode and the episode that we talk about next week have some complicated age dynamics.
Yep. It seemed to be the trope of what if the hot older woman of your desire turned out to be a serial killer of young men, a kind of Black Widow story. The hot teacher is a serial killer. The hot babysitter is a serial killer. But it's only bad if they're a serial killer. Teachers dating students, we talk about this in martial arts gyms because people not only miss the issue with it, but sometimes think it's cool, cough, the X-Men cartoon reboot. This story tried to get deep, trying to ask questions about art, but it wasn't all that deep because there was no thought experiment involved. Whether Onaya killed Jake or not, he would eventually die and his art would live on. So living through your art is baked into being an artist.
Yes.
The better question to ask is, if you do live on, how will history judge you? The way white society thought about art most of my life until recently was, if art is appreciated, end of story. That's just how it goes from then on. Once it gets to home plate, it's done. Case closed. But that's not true at all because standpoints change. Who were the people who decided something was good? Who never got a voice in deciding something was a great work of art? We all need to ask ourselves, whose standpoint are we using as the proxy for the universal?
Yeah, I mean, and also like the canon is in art. The canon is often taken care of by the rich. The poor make art and the rich control and gatekeep. At least they used to. Now it's changing a little bit. But when people say like, oh, why isn't there a Black Mozart or something? Well, there is the Chevalier. But one of the reasons why 250 years ago, there were probably many brilliant young Black composers and young Black female composers and female composers. You think that 250 years ago, the only brilliant artists were white dudes? I mean, in Western society, of course. That's impossible. Not only is it improbable, it's impossible. But the only people really given the lens, really given the option, really given the resources were well-to-do white dudes.
A note to our listeners. If you love the Southpaw Project, please support us and help us get paid for our labor by financially supporting us on Patreon. This will give you access to exclusive bonus content, like early releases of Southpaw Deep Space 9, our fictional narrative podcast, Fighters Brew, break-free versions of our shows without interruptions like you're hearing now, bonus articles, Fighters Brew transcripts with extra content, Liberation Martial Arts Online, as well as our private chat group on Discord. You can also make one-time donations at Ko-Fi or show your solidarity by wearing our swag. You can find all pertinent links at southpawpod.com.
So when we argue, like, why aren't there tons of Black composers from these eras, is because of access. Is Beethoven incredibly talented? Yes, no question. But the idea that there weren't other brilliantly talented music writers from different places is just it's infactual. So the importance of how art is remembered and the importance of canon and why artistic gatekeeping is such rubbish and highly political. When people try to say, oh, I don't want my art to be political. My brother, all art is political, whether you like it or not. I remember someone one time trying to tell me that I'm too political with Star Trek. I'm like, dog, what are you watching?
And to that point, right, standpoints about even a radical show like DS9 changes. I think as we're watching, we're changing the standpoints, thinking about things differently, even from maybe your earlier watches, maybe the way even radicals first thought about this show. We're changing standpoints and being much more critical of the show. And the way this show will be remembered, the way we think about the show is still yet to be written. And there's a lot of bypassing that's happened, which happens in all fandom. And we're going to try to talk about as much of it as we can as we look at it through a new lens. Now let's get to the main part. The main crux of this episode was an Odo and Loaxana reunion, which led to the familiar theme that Odo is forever alone. But there's a chemistry between these two. And through Loaxana, we see Odo becoming more human, which reminds me of the evolution of Data from Next Gen, which people have different opinions about. I feel like some people like that evolution and some people like how Data was at the beginning. And then later on, he became more like all the other characters. Well, he was still Data, but like what made him so different at the beginning started to go away. So I don't know if there's enough time for that to happen to Odo, but there is this similar humanizing that's happening, which we'll get to in the next episode when we talk about For the Cause, where I have some stuff to mention about assimilation, Western hegemony.
Me too.
And about canon and how people remember things and how the standpoint about DS9 just being super radical. Maybe even radicals don't really remember the show that well. But as it pertains to this episode, there was also some sort of criticism of patriarchy, misogyny, which you spoke about. Actually, maybe that was more you just saying it. But they seem to just muddle through that to get to the emotional crux of the story between Odo and Loaxana. Loaxana is one of the few people who really gets Odo, so a lot of what he said was genuine. So of course he has to lose her and never see her again. So they're really building up this loneliness aspect, and I'm curious, is this building to something, or is this just a consistent vibe for the character of Odo? O'Brien gets physically tortured and Odo gets emotionally tortured. I'm curious how this will inform the character of Odo as we keep moving along. So, Scott, give us your thoughts on this episode, its importance in mythology, and your rating.
I give this episode 3.5. It's fine.
It's not bad.
It's literally fine. I like us seeing Jake being a writer and how it's complicated. And obviously Luoxana Troy, Michelle Roddenberry is a hoot and all that. But yeah, I'm just like, it's fine. And as far as the canon, it's not that important, like mythology. I mean, it's important to the fact that Odo is lonely is interesting, but it doesn't talk about any of his plans to deal with his loneliness here, so it's not that important.
It doesn't really talk about much.
No.
So it is a middle episode, but for a middle episode, it was fine.
Yeah.
Can you tell us about the next episode?
Cassidy?
Until then.